So on that note then, let's unpack that decision by the ANC. Joining me now is Professor Sipho Seepe, a political analyst, to talk to me about these matters. Prof. Seepe, thank you for your time. It came as a surprise to me. I don't know about you. To me, it came as a surprise. I thought, here's the ANC putting the Electoral Court in a bit of a quandary to say, you ought to instruct the IEC to reopen the candidate list submission simply because we did not make the deadline and no one else was complaining about any glitches to the system. And of course, there was that precedent with the NFP who could not field candidates in 2016. Were you as surprised as I was?
Well, I was surprised that the ANC would have decided to approach the court on that basis. Precisely because we have a precedent on this matter. And what was interesting and probably strange is the arguments or reasons that the ANC had advanced. One was the suggestion that the problem was with the IEC, that there were technical glitches, and that argument could not be sustained because you had other parties that had used the very same system and were able to register. And the DA had also indicated that it was going to oppose that argument based on its own success to register its own people. Secondly, is the issue of precedence. And the other argument that the ANC was using is that because it's a leader in society, it had to conduct the most rigorous selection process, and both the COVID pandemic and also the fact that it's a leader in society meant that it could not do this on time. But that also is a weak argument if you consider that we are in a constitutional democracy that is underpinned by regular elections. It is not that the ANC woke up suddenly and realized that this is a time for it to register. We know full well that every 5 years there are elections at the municipal level as well as at the national level. So this reflects both its own incompetence. So for it to withdraw, it actually does save itself the embarrassment of being told where to get off, because the Electoral Court could not suddenly decide to say, just because we're now dealing with the ANC, we need to change the decision that we've made before. And the other argument of technical glitches were simply going to be opposed by the IEC. The IEC instead has gone to the Constitutional Court for a different reason, not to cover up the incompetence of the ANC, but should the Constitutional Court rule in favor of the IEC, the ANC will be a beneficiary in a sense that a new timetable may have to be put on the table.
Yeah, it would provide them some reprieve if the other application, which is separate from the one that's now been withdrawn, the IEC application, if it were to be successful in the Constitutional Court with the result that the elections get postponed, it would reset the timetable, which perhaps would then give the ANC some kind of reprieve, which makes me wonder then, I'm pretty sure you are aware of the theory being floated that the ANC, the African National Congress, part of the reason why they are withdrawing is that they are suddenly buoyant about their chances and prospects of seeing the IEC being successful at Concord. We'll know, of course, that the ANC supported the relief that the IEC is seeking at the Constitutional Court. What do you make of that theory being floated?
Well, it's a self-saving position by the ANC to support the IEC because it will cover its own incompetence. I mean, it's a matter that is known that the ANC has been embroiled in internal factional battles, that it had actually failed to focus on governance and also on making sure that the party is in good standing with regard to the preparation of elections. So supporting the IEC and also using the pandemic as an excuse is something that will serve the ANC well. But we must also understand that the argument that is presented around the COVID-19 is based on speculation that says at the time that is being suggested, we might have gone through the worst case of the pandemic, the wave that people expect, that the pandemic might be receding and most of our people would have vaccinated. So that is one argument. But there are people who have also argued that we've had countries that had voted during the time when the pandemic was still ravaging their countries, but they took measures to deal with it. So we must accept that we had failed as a country to deal with the pandemic properly, so as to make sure that this constitutional stipulation is respected. But what Moseneke has actually done, he says, looking at the law and also the constitution, there is a window that provides a possibility that you could actually push back the timetable, and which does make sense if one were to believe what the scientists are saying in terms of how the pandemic will pan itself out. But we must not lose sight of the fact that the posture by the ANC is self-saving. It is self-saving in the sense that it helps it to cover up its own incompetence. So it appears that it's so confident that the IEC, based on the argument that it has put, would be successful. And in that case, the ANC does not have to pursue this agenda of forcing the Electoral Court to order the IEC to reopen the registration.
Prof. Seepe, just as a final and a parting shot to you, I want to hear your thoughts about what's really at play here, perhaps coming out of any specific issue, but taking all the issues in their totality, this perfect storm of issues that we have seen around the ANC, the inability to pay staff, issues around whether or not they were submitting what they were withdrawing from staff by way of Provident Fund, where it was supposed to go, and SARS, whether SARS was getting its due, the factionalism, the suspension of the Secretary General at the moment, and almost everyone pulling in a different direction. It feels to me, and then of course add the inability to hold an NGC, inability to pay, to have candidates registered on time. It feels to me that the only analogy I can think of is the Ramaphosa-led NEC at the driving seat, but this car is falling apart. The panels are flying off. The bumper is flying off. A light is falling off here and there. And the wheel is wobbly, but they're pressing on and they're still on the accelerator. What does it all mean for the sustainability of the ANC going forward and its role in our democracy?
Well, I think at one level we must be sympathetic from a perspective that says this was bound to happen, that this is a historical inevitability of a party that had failed to resolve its own ideological differences. So what has happened is that the contradictions have deepened so much that we've reached a stage where the party now spends most of its energy fighting what it failed to resolve, those ideological differences. But secondly, you have the context of democracy is very different. The party had mastered the art of opposing apartheid, and it mastered the skills of doing that. Now, when it comes to democracy, we find that it has not been able to develop the required skills and attitude that is required of a party that is in government. And also the whole sense of incumbency adds to all of this. So we must accept that there comes a time when even the best of us would be found wanting. Empires collapse, and the ANC is going through a series of collapses, and there'll be major collapse. But that is what happens with living organisms. And one hopes that it can learn from this and maybe recover. But the extent to which it fails is almost catastrophic. There's a party that is a party of workers, or has claimed to be a party of workers, yet it's the very same party that undermines the rights of workers, the basic conditions of employment. How do you begin to even talk about that? And the COSATU and the Alliance Party must be very embarrassed that its major ally is actually failing on what COSATU was formed to advance.
Just trying to find a silver lining for the ANC here, Professor Seepe. Could there be a reading that says, South Africans can perhaps take comfort in the fact that the current ANC has decided it would rather face the financial struggles that it faces than fund itself through illicit means? Issues such as, they're talking about how donors suddenly are not forthcoming because of the requirement to disclose with the IEC in terms of the Political Party Funding Act. Could there be a reading that says, well, If those donors insist on such secrecy, it means that they've got a lot to hide about their motives for donating to the ANC. And if they're not donating, then good riddance. It's better to have an ANC that goes out with a begging bowl than to have an ANC founded illicitly. Could that be a silver lining of any sort?
Well, I mean, one must buy a little bit to that idea, except that that idea is undermined by the fact that the very same donors are willing to donate to an individual within the ANC. Effectively, what the donors are making a statement is that we don't care about the ANC. We care about our men. And as people have said, that there's no free lunch. If people give you R1 billion to run a campaign, and then you also run to the court to say this should not be known, that should not give us a sense of comfort until we have the truth coming out. Yeah. Only then can we actually say this is a form of deepening of democracy. But we cannot talk about the need for transparency in one sense when it comes to parties, but then say when it comes to individuals, there should be no such a degree of transparency. Absolutely. And this is where we find it amazing that you have parties that always have campaigned on the basis of truth, that they let the truth be known, let us be transparent. But when it comes to this other matter, they say, no, here the truth should not be known, that we can no longer campaign on the fact that we want to know everything. So this is where it becomes a major problem. But I do accept and the view that says the whole notion of party funding should be made public, because when we have that, then we have at least a sense of control to say the policies that are taken in government are not policies that are driven by those with money. That right. When we say the people shall govern, it becomes the people who shape both the policy and direction of the governors.
I fully accept what you're saying. Thank you for that, Professor Sipho Seepe, because one has to wonder, where are these donors that were willing to donate upwards of 400 million rand for Cyril Ramaphosa's campaign, and goodness knows how much more was donated for the other campaigns as well, right? Because at some point we had about 7 candidates. Where are they today to donate to the party rather than to the individuals? Thank you for that. That's Professor Sipho Seepe there, weighing in on the issues around the African National Congress, also raising some pretty important points about the loopholes in the Political Party Funding Act.